Amen. So Ecclesiastes chapter 3, I think the best thing we can do this morning is just read the first 8 verses together. So let's do that. Solomon says, "To everything there is a season, a time for every purpose under heaven, a time to be born and a time to die, a time to plant, a time to pluck up what is planted." In verse 3, a time to kill, a time to heal, a time to break down and a time to build up, a time to weep and a time to laugh, a time to mourn and a time to dance, and a time to cast away stones and a time to gather stones, a time to embrace and a time to refrain from embracing, a time to gain and a time to lose, a time to keep and a time to throw away, a time to tear and a time to sow, a time to keep silence and a time to speak up, a time to love and a time to hate, a time of war and a time of peace. So let that be our context for just a moment. And let me remind you of the ultimate reality of the book of Ecclesiastes, especially if this is your first week or you have no reference point to what we've been studying the last few weeks. Solomon was the wisest man ever that lived on the face of this earth. And that's not just like someone's theory. That's what God explicitly did in his life. God granted him a wisdom that was next level, far beyond than the normal man, transcendent wisdom. And with that wisdom came unbelievable amounts of wealth as well. So it's fair to say, especially in Solomon's day, but even throughout history, Solomon was the richest, wisest man that ever lived. And with that vantage point, he realized something about himself, that very few people will ever have his vantage point in life. Very few people, even rulers and dictators and all those kinds of things, they'll never have the status that Solomon would have. So Solomon thought, here's an idea, I will live my life as the supreme example of a man with wealth and power and wisdom and all those kinds of things. And I will do whatever pleases me. I will try to find the meaning of life without God. The phrase that he uses again and again is under the sun. That's his way of saying, I'm going to consider life as a man underneath the sun and no further. I'm not going to consider God and eternity and life after this, which is interesting if you've been here, and we'll see it this morning. Why that's interesting, he says that's what he's going to do. So Solomon, with all of his vast wisdom, he comes to chapter 3 now, and he's realizing in his search and meaning for life, as we've seen, it's been very meaningless to him. He's come to this point where he realizes there's a time for everything in life. There's seasons of life, and that's something we'll talk about. But we'll start with something maybe more geared for the Bible nerds, okay? I thought you'd like that. The Bible nerds first. We usually put you last, but we'll put you first this morning, okay? Just something, and this is for everybody, but the Bible nerds are really going to like this. If you look at this list that Solomon gives us, it's important for me to remind you right now that in the Hebrew tradition of transliteration, numbers have always had a symbolic value and a symbolic meaning. So, for example, the number 13 is indicative of government, for example. Or the number 6 is relevant to the number of a man. The number 4 is relevant to the earth. So the number 4 represents the earth. And the reason for that, of course, is that the 4 corners of the earth, as the Bible calls it, north, east, south, and west. So earth is represented in the number 4. And the number 7 is represented in completion, because on the seventh day, all of creation was complete on God's calendar. Now, I'm telling you that for a reason, because if the earth is represented in 4, and the number 7 is representative of completion, 7 times 4 is 28. And this is a list of 28 things, 14 of them positive, 14 of them negative. These 28 things make up the totality of the completion of the cycle of life on earth. Isn't that interesting? Numerically speaking. Not only that, but if you remember our previous studies, Solomon has said that everything equates to nothing underneath the sun without God. So it's interesting that he gives us 14 positives and 14 negatives, which means 14 minus 14 is? That's an easy one, right? 0. So the sum total of life, here's the full meaning of life, he says, but it ultimately means nothing. So even numerically in the Hebrew, he's passing on the idea that he's come to, that here's the total meaning of life, but it's ultimately meaningless, is what he's saying. And again, let's remember this. Solomon's theology is not great because according to this theology, there is no God. There is no theology. It's just ology, right? So here it is. The first thing we want to take and consider on an applicational, practical level this morning, very helpful for all of us in verse 1. Everything in life, for everything, there is a season, a time for every purpose under heaven. There is a season for everything in life. You and I probably need to hear that this morning. Life is seasonal. It's hard to live in any particular season without thinking about the next season, isn't it? Good or bad. If it's bad, you're thinking about how good seasons are ahead. If it's good, you're thinking bad seasons are ahead. The most stark thing I can think of just the other day was shown to me, a montage of winter images and videos of like your car being stuck and you left water in your car, it's all frozen, and they said, do not put off your summer plans because this is what we're looking at in 5 months here. I said, wow. I'd like to find the guy that made that video and thank him for that. But it's true. Here we are. We're in the beautiful middle of the summer. But we're thinking, winter's coming. Winter's coming around the corner. It's haunting, isn't it? But you're in a season. It's not always summer. It's not always winter. It's not always fall. It's not always spring. Life is seasonal. And there are some seasons that are a lot of fun. There are some seasons that are a drag. There's seasons of loss, seasons of gain, all of it. He just described to us what life is summed up in all the different kinds of seasons. But I would just remind you of something this morning. Embrace the season that you're in. Fully embrace that season that you're in. And with the help of God, work through it is my ultimate encouragement. But life is seasonal. And so he lays out all these different options of what life throws at us. Starting with, of course, there's a time to be born. There's a time to die. There's a time to be born, there's a time to die. As believers, that is ultimately a true statement, but there is a generation, according to the Bible, that is going to escape death, literally. Escape it. The followers of God that are on the earth at a certain point, we don't know when, the church has been longing and looking forward to this since its inception, that the Lord is coming back and he's going to rescue his church from this earth. He's going to do it at some point. What's funny is we all argue about when the rapture happens, but we all agree, hopefully, except for a few weirdos, the rapture is going to happen, right? And there's always like, well, it's actually not going to happen. It's like, well, what a waste of time that was, But here's the thing. It's going to happen. God is going to mysteriously just vacuum suck us up and take us off this earth. All I can think is that bank tube, you know what I mean? We're going to go someday. But I say that because seriously, there's a time to be born, there's a time to die. All of us are going to meet our death. And I'm kind of famous for reminding us of that often here at church. Nothing's guaranteed to us. We could be dead tomorrow. But there is a neat comment I came across from William MacDonald. I want to share this with you. He says, though death is a possibility, it is not a certainty. The blessed hope of Christ's return inspires the believer to look for the Savior rather than the mortician. As the preacher Peter Pell put it so colorfully, I'm not waiting for the undertaker, I'm waiting for the upper taker. Right? That's pretty cool, isn't it? So here's the thing. Truly, unless the Lord comes back, we're all going to die. Pretty dismal. It's a reality. It's part of life. Part of life is death, okay? That is part of life, as we read here even in this passage. But would to God that we could be the generation that skips that and bypasses death altogether. I mean, seriously, how cool. I've always been a little bit biffed about that, actually, because I'm like, we're probably going to be the generation that's raptured in all of church history. Here we are, and poof, we go up there. And we meet all the saints of old. And we're talking about our glorious rapture experience. And they're like, yeah, but I died. You don't know what that's like. Oh, man, what is that like, I know it sounds weird. I know that sounds weird coming from a human being. But I'm telling you, because of Christ and the work that he's done in my life, I kind of want to know what that's all about. You know what I mean? What kind of experience are we looking at when we die? You hear all sorts of afterlife stories, but what is it like, man? What is it really like? And I'd be fascinated to know. So I guess my ultimate conclusion has always been, while we're dying, we get raptured. That would be the ultimate, wouldn't it? You're dying and you get raptured. I'm the only guy that happened to, That would be cool. However, back to the line here. There's a time for everything, a time to be born, a time to die. We could go through the list, we won't, but you get the idea. Let's look at a few of these, though, in verse 4. There's a time to weep and there's a time to laugh. Notice how he said in the last chapter, he sought humor as the ultimate fulfillment of life, and he said that that's just meaningless. It's just empty, and it's true. You can't laugh your way all the way through life. It's not possible. There are things you can laugh about, and it's healthy and helpful. But he said there is a time, in verse 4, to weep and a time to laugh. Yesterday, and I'm telling you this for a reason. Yesterday, my wife and I celebrated 18 years of marriage. Okay? Thank you so much. Thank you. Stop. No, keep going. It's No, I'm not telling you that to like brag. Or I can tell you for real though, as a pastor, and it might be healthy for you to know the man that comes up here and speaks. I have had 18 years of a healthy, happy, faithful marriage. Okay? We're not like hanging on every week. Are we going to make it? It's like we are thrilled to be married. Right, babe? I'm thrilled to be married, I should say. She saw me and she said, I can't let this one go. She had to get me, so anyway. But we celebrated 18 years of marriage yesterday, okay? Here's the deal. We're starting our journey to do this little day away, hang out together and all that. And I was driving and I looked across the road in Augusta as we're about to get on the highway. And there was a black SUV with a young lady in the front, probably a widow or a young mother, something like this. And she is in the front car of a funeral procession, and she has got the napkin, and she's dabbing her eyes. She's crying as they're making their way in this funeral procession. And I could not help but think of this chapter. There is literally someone driving on the other side of the road to one of the most depressing, dark days of their life, while me and my wife are driving away to celebrate our 18 years of marriage. Is that life or what? In that same roadway, 10 feet away, that person, that lady is weeping. I have no idea who she lost, but she lost someone she loves. And I'm riding with my wife after 18 years, and we're still going. Let's go, baby. Man, there's a time to weep. There's a time to laugh. There's a time to mourn. There's a time to dance. My pastor taught me when I was young. I'm so thankful for it. Greg, if you're going to last in ministry, but it's true of life, I've learned, if you're going to last in ministry, you need to learn how to separate the bitter from the sweet. And honestly, when he said that, I had no idea what he was talking about. But as I've watched him live his life and do things like bury his 18-year-old son that died in a car accident and watch him strategically separate the bitter from the sweet, it really does something to you. But life is full of bitterness and sweetness. And if you're going to last in life, you got to learn how to separate the bitter from the sweet. And there's a time for it all. And there's a time and a season. Why do we do it, though? Why do we act like those times aren't going to come our way? If we're really honest, there's a part of us that hopes and believes, not me, man. It's not going to happen to me. I've been a good boy. I've done a lot of good things, whatever the reason you might have. And I found this. When people make their marriage vows, for example, we say rich or poor, sick or with health or not. We say all these things, but what we're really implying is we're hoping for all the good stuff. The bad stuff might come, but hopefully it doesn't, is what we're really saying, isn't it? But what our vows are actually declaring is all of these things are going to come, and we're always going to be with each other through it all, right? Those are symbolic in our marriage vows, friends. But my point is, none of us escape the hardships of life. It does not matter how much money you have or how much money you don't have. How much success or not, it does not matter. Life and hardships come our way. All of these seasons come to everyone. That's why it breaks my heart when someone's like, yeah, curse those rich people. They have no idea. Like, yeah, hold on. They have nothing to complain about. Really? How about life? That's something to complain about, isn't it? Life is hard, and it sucks without God. Terribly. But it can also be amazing. So what do they have to complain about? Life. That's what everyone has to complain about. Because life will throw you some of the most sweet moments that you want to drink in every day you live. But you get it for a moment. And then the next day, it's the most brutal, painful thing you've ever walked through a day in your life. And one of the great things about honoring God is doing all of it in every season, no matter what he gives you, what he calls you to. Now, I'm sure there's a lot more that we could say about this passage, but I would end with something historical, actually. It's the final statement. There's a time for peace and a time for war. Time for peace and a time for war. Being the 250th anniversary of our nation, as you know that attend church here, I can't give it up. I'm pretty fired up about that. It wasn't like it's the 4th of July, 2026, yeehaw. Guys, for months beforehand and months after, I am just redlining on American. I'm just, woohoo! I'm American all over again. And I talk to my other Americans, are like, yeah, that happened like last month, dude. Like, we're like over it. It's like, no, it's still July, actually, so you stop moving on, okay? Okay. But I think it's important to tell you a little bit of American history, just because it's pertinent to our Bible study. This passage that I just read to you and shared with you was also taught on January 21st, 1776 by a pastor named John Muhlenberg in Virginia. And he taught this passage, and when he finished reading A Time for War and a Time for Peace, he took off famously, you've probably seen this in movies like The Patriot, I've heard of it, he took off his clerical robe and revealed that he was wearing a Continental Army uniform. And he said, brothers, it's time for war! And they're like, yeah, whatever, woo! They're like, let's go! Hundreds of guys went with him. Apparently, more men than there were even in the church, and they tried to figure it out going back through history. How did that work? How is it that the congregation was only a few hundred, and yet hundreds upon hundreds of men signed up? It's because the wives that were there signed their husbands up. It was unbelievable. They're like, he's going. My pastor is awesome. He's going. It's pretty amazing. But here's what's interesting about John Muhlenberg. He had a brother that was a pastor as well in New York. Frederick Muhlenberg chastised him. He said, what are you doing, man? You're a pastor. You're not a soldier. You're supposed to be a pastor. You can't mix those two things. Probably something he would have said if it existed. Separation of church and state, man. Something like that, And our pastor, John Muhlenberg, said, no, there is no separation of those things. I have a duty to God and a duty to my fellow man and my nation, and this is what's called upon me now. And notice, that was January 1776. His brother Frederick took a while, but then when the British came to New York and burned Frederick's church to the ground, all of a sudden he felt the lead and the calling to be part of the call. Amazing how that'll work, right? Hey, leave them alone, they'll leave us alone. Or they'll burn your church down and then you'll get involved, right? Here's what you need to know about Frederick, though. Frederick obviously would ultimately get involved with the cause, but he would also become the first Speaker of the House. So, a little bit of American history all started here in Ecclesiastes chapter 3 when John Muhlenberg stood up in January of 1776, and he said, it's on like bing bong, is what he said. Something like that, And thank God. And let me remind you of this. It was the pastors. Listen, you all need to hear this. It was the pastors that led the revolution. Yeah. The British hated the pastors. They called them the Black Robe Regiment. And they cursed them. And when they would find a pastor and they identified a man as a pastor, they would torture him brutally, endlessly, because they hated the fact that the pastors created the uprising. Let me remind you of these stupid statements we make in America today. There's no place for politics in the pulpit. There would be no America without politics that were in the pulpit. Okay? We cool? I know you'll be back next week. I don't know about everybody else, but thank you so much for you folks that clapped. Now again, that's not to, and let me just say this, really, it's not politics, it's morality. We're talking about morality because that's all that politics are nowadays, right? Any political issue, I'll show you the moral ramification for it or the reality of it, right? It's just a way to silence people in church so that we don't do our part and that so other people can do what they want to do. And let's have like a 250-year-old version of that, Let's still be the Black Robe Regiment, as it were. So, and next time I say that, and sometime in the future, we'll all clap together. We'll say, "Wow, that was awesome," But not today. So, anyway, a little American history from Ecclesiastes 3. Moving on to verse 9, let's look at this together. Considering life in its totality there, he says, what profit has the worker from that in which he labors? For in verse 10, I have seen the God-given task with which the sons of men are to be occupied. He, in verse 11, has made everything beautiful in its time. Also, he has put eternity in their hearts, except that no one can find out the work that God does from the beginning to the end. And I know in verse 12 that nothing is better for them than to rejoice and to do good in their lives, and also that every man should eat and drink and enjoy the good of all of his labor. It is the gift of God. Now, there is so much there to talk about, but it's such a repeat of things he's been going over and over and over again, because the cycle of life, the realities of life, and he's trying to do this, as we're going to talk about thoroughly in a moment, without God, right? But I'll make this case clear in a moment. He can't do it. He's trying, but he keeps saying eternity and God and eternity, and he's put it in their hearts, and he says no one can find out the work of God. Well, that's helpful. It really actually is. Just let me remind us this morning of our vantage point when we criticize God. Like, why would God let this happen? There's a lot of reasons. But here's one thing that we need to understand. We don't know what God knows. We don't know. That's the number one thing. It's kind of like general leadership. And I'm not saying all leadership is perfect and they don't know what they're doing. Some people are incompetent and all the rest of it. And some people have disqualified themselves as leaders and all that kind of thing. However, there's a vast majority of leadership that part of the problem that we have with our leaders, whoever that is, whether it's in their job or the church or whatever the thing is, it's that we don't know all of the details. But we want to weigh in with what we see. And we're frustrated with what we see. But that's because, like he says here, we don't know all that God knows. It's the vantage point thing. We don't see everything that God sees. When you say, why would God allow that? Why would God do that? Well, the real answer is we don't know, but it's easy because we don't know what he sees. We don't know what he's doing. We don't know the behind the scenes. So, I will rest on a Pastor Chuck Smith quote on this one. It's one of my favorites. He said, if I could see everything that God sees, I would agree with everything that God is doing. If I could see everything that God sees, I would agree with everything he's doing. But I can't, and that's what Solomon's frustrated by. He's like, I can't see it all. I can't understand it all. And he's like, it's just impossible. So we read on, verse 14. He says, I know that whatever God does, it shall be forever. Nothing can be added to it, nothing taken away from it. God does it, that men should fear before him. That in verse 15, which has already been, and that is what is already going to be, and has been. And God requires an account of what is past. So like everything we've seen has already happened, and God already knows all that, is what he's saying. Notice in these two verses, God, God, God. You remember the first two studies we undertook, he was very explicit in saying, I'm going to consider life and he didn't even say his name. He's like, I'm not even going to mention the person we're all thinking about right now. Right? Isn't that what he does in chapter 1? He's like, the best I can give you a hint is only what's under the sun. So the reader's like, okay, so we're not going to mention God at all. Right? But what's amazing is if you do a study of the words that are used in the book of Ecclesiastes, in the top 5 single words that are used, God is on the top 5 list of a book he's not even supposed to be in. Isn't that fascinating? He's like, listen, I'm a staunch atheist. I won't even mention God one time. God, 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 God. It's like, when are you going to stop mentioning God, man? You keep mentioning God. It's so crazy. I'm not going to bring God into this at all, except for 40 times. Wow. Okay, man. But that really is worth, again, even though we've studied this in the last couple of weeks, it's worth me pointing out once again that he tries as a glorified, rich, powerful man to make sense of life without God, but he comes back to this reality that somehow it always comes back to like God, God, God. And in a moment, it's even cooler than what he does with it. It's very helpful and it's very true. But he's wrestling, and he doesn't even want to bring God into the equation, but he can't help himself. But listen, it's probably pretty obvious for us to acknowledge God as the creator, right? I'd say that. But that's the starting point. But we can live there the rest of our lives wrestling with if God created it or not. People do, of course. You know this. We know this. That's why the old saying is Genesis 1 verse 1. If you can accept that, the rest of the Bible's a breeze, right? In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. After that, like nothing blows your mind, right? He parted the Red Sea. Woo! It's like, yeah, well, he created it. So that's kind of cool. Like people are like trying to mystify and take away the parting of the Red Sea. It's like, what about the creation account, man? That's the biggest miracle of all. But listen, I am thrilled to tell you this morning as a pastor, a man of God's word here, having taught through the whole Bible, coming up on the second time around, that he's the creator, okay? But that's not enough. He's not just the creator. We're not deists. He didn't just wind up the world and let it go and unfold. God is the creator. You ready for this? He's also the sustainer. That means he's in charge and in connection with all of the details of everything that goes on. You want a statement from the Lord Jesus? You remember what it was? Not even a sparrow falls to the ground without my notice. If I were God, I wouldn't have cared how many birds died tomorrow. But not even a single sparrow falls to the ground without him knowing. Unreal. So he's the creator, the sustainer, and here's the best part. He is the finisher of it all as well. He who began a good work in you will bring it to completion. So he didn't just create it, he sustains it, and he's going to finish it. In other words, God is involved in everyone and everything at all times. So the creator piece is awesome, Solomon, but there's so much more to it. Let me give you an illustration. I try not to take like some old tired illustrations. I try to think of something practical for us tonight. Or this morning. So here it is. Imagine if we got in some vehicles and rode together, and I took you up into Northport or some beautiful place, went up a hillside, and I brought you to the most beautiful mansion you've ever seen in your life. Beautiful. Ornate details, because we've gotten so far away from that today in society, right? We don't have time for ornate details. Who can do it the fastest and the cheapest, right? But ornate details, ivory, gold, and it's just one of the most impeccable, beautiful homes you ever walk into a day in your life. Now, here's the first thing that goes on in your mind. Who lives here? Whose house is this? Why is it up here? When was it built? Does someone live here? Do they have people that serve here? You have a bunch of questions, but we just say nothing and we walk into the house, this beautiful, ornate house, and there's an entire room that is established for the building process. In there is an architect table. It's set to the upright position, and the architect's plans are laid out. All of the rooms are designed. It's all written in form that you can see in front of you. And in the bottom corner, they have the architect, they have the builder, and they have the homeowner right there in the corner. Now, we're not going to get very far if all we can ascertain in that moment is that this is a house. Well, isn't that neat? Wow. Thank you. This is earth. It's like, wow, we've come a long way. Okay, this is earth. This is a house. But now let's start answering the questions. Who built this house? Well, hey, I see a name on the paper. Oh, no, those are just random letters that have fallen on the page. Those can't mean anything to us. Okay. And you have, okay, well, when was it built? Well, all we know is there was a bunch of trees and rocks up here, and a massive thunderstorm a while back, and exploded, and this house is here now. And so, but what about the architect plans and all the stuff that's on it? And well, that doesn't mean anything. All that writing is just nonsense, and it's probably just man wrote it anyway, right? We can't trust that anyway. Do you guys see where I'm going with this? See what I'm saying? I've quoted Richard Dawkins in the last couple weeks. I got to do it again. Ben Stein did an awesome interview with him years ago on something called Expelled, which was basically, it's a great documentary. You could watch it on how scientists that are believing that there's a creator, a designer behind the creation that we see, they're being expelled from the scientific community. Their resources are being shut off, and they're being expelled from the scientific community, right? It's an awesome documentary. If you don't know who Ben Stein is, he did the Dry Eyes commercial. So he's a super dry guy, and his questions, though, are on fire. So he asked Richard Dawkins, which is like the leading atheist of our generation, he said, Richard, if you got to heaven and God were real? And he's like, oh, no, I'm not real. I don't believe that. I can't believe that. He says, but if you did, if you just had entertained me for a moment, if he were real, what would you say to him? And he said, well, of course, it took him a long time to agree to make this hypothetical up because he just can't handle the idea of God. He said, well, I guess if I were face to face with God and it were real, I would ask him why he went through such great lengths to hide himself from humanity. That would be like me bringing you to that house, showing you the architect plans and the name of the architect, the builder, and the homeowner, and you saying, I just don't know what we're talking about here. What's going on here? What's happening? All the answers, it's like, it's deductive reasoning, it's reality, it's rationality, it's all right here. So Solomon is in this quandary of wanting to define it without defining it, you know? So, we move on. This is where it gets even better. Verse 16. He said, moreover, I saw under the sun, in the place of judgment, wickedness was there. And in the place of righteousness, iniquity was there. And I said in my heart, this is amazing. I said in my heart, God shall judge the righteous and the wicked. For there is a time there for every purpose and for every work. No, he just made an amazing claim for a man that doesn't want to talk about God. He says it like this: I considered life and realized that there is wickedness on every level, everywhere. Amongst the wicked you would expect it, but even with the righteous in judgment, there is wickedness. And he's disgusted by it. And his only conclusion is that God is going to sort it out in the end. I thought we weren't talking about God, right? But here's the reality, friends. This is a real thing we need to realize. Without God as the judge, there will be no accountability for the evil that happens to people. See, we say, well, why would God let that happen? Hold on. Imagine God lets it happen, but he deals with it in true justice. See, if we take God out of the equation, guess what? Bad things happen to good people, and there's no making that right, or in some cases, making things wrong. It's just, when you die, every horrible thing that's happened to you is what it is, man. Like that, it is what it is, right? Just, it happened. So that's all we can do is accept it. No, much greater point, much more important, Deuteronomy 32. God says, vengeance is mine, right? Now, I got to be honest with you. When I first came around church and I heard that, I was super bummed. Because I'm like, Lord, I'm kind of good at getting vengeance, though. And like, I don't really need you to do a lot of vengeance. I can handle all the vengeance myself, right? I was kind of bragging about the fact I can create vengeance for myself and for the people around me. So when I heard that God says, vengeance is mine, I was like bugged. I was biffed. But here's the amazing thing. He says, vengeance is mine, I will repay. See, I never emphasized or thought about the God part where he says, I will repay. And that's what Solomon just realized. Wow. Outside of God, when we all die, all the injustices that'll happen to us, they die with us. But only if God takes those things on, everything will be made right someday. Isn't that awesome? Someday. You say, well, what about that person that raped that person or killed that person or did those horrific things? What about? What about when we stand in front of God at the great white throne judgment, and he hashes all of those things out. And he deals with them in a way that we're like, whoa. You know, the book of Revelation has a famous saying that I've held on to for many years of my life. Righteous and true are your judgments, O God. Righteous and true are your judgments. That's as, remember this, that's as the people in heaven, which I believe you and I, hopefully, are looking down at the judgment of God being poured out on earth. And we're not like, how could you do this? We're like, righteous and true are your judgments, O God. In the book of Revelation, you know, they're shaking their fist at God. I did not know that about the book of Revelation. I thought in the book of Revelation, people were clueless, like, what's going on here, Harry? And no one knew what was happening on earth. But if you read the book of Revelation, there's actually satanic worship, and people are raising their fist to God and blaspheming him. So as he pours his judgment on them, they're worthy of it. And we're saying, righteous and true are your judgments, O God. So isn't it interesting, there in verse 16 and 17, Solomon thinking about wickedness and injustice and the things that have happened to you and I, he says in life it's meaningless, but when the only thing he could say is, well, God's going to take care of it in the end. God will repay evil for evil and good for good, he says. God will take care of that. It's a freeing thing. It's a great reminder. So, our last few verses, verse 18. He said, I said in my heart, concerning the condition of the sons of men, God tests them, that they may see that they themselves are like animals. For what happened to the sons of men also happened to animals. One thing befalls them, and one dies, and so dies another. And surely they all have one breath. Man has no advantage over the animals, for all is emptiness. But in verse 20, all go to one place. All are from the dust, and all return to dust. Who knows the spirit of the sons of men, which go upward, and the spirit of the animal, which goes down to the earth? So I perceive that nothing is better than that a man should just rejoice in his own works, for that is his heritage. For who can bring him to see what will happen after him? Now, this is our final passage, a few things to consider, okay? Now what he does is what people do in our day and age. They compare humankind to animal kind. It's like, well, look, the animals are doing it. Maybe we should do it. Or to like justify certain practices that we have as humans. Like you could pick one and be like, well, the animals do it. It's like, well, animals like eat their own children too. So like that's, I don't know if we want to just do what animals do, you know. It's a weird line of thinking that people have. But again, if this was all just a big cosmic accident, the animal, the monkey, the gorilla, the donkey is no different than you and I. We can just talk, I guess, right? It's kind of weird. You don't get a bunch of donkeys sitting on Sunday mornings doing this, do you? Maybe you do. I don't know. Anyway, yeah. Some of you are like, actually, here's the thing. Life without God, there's not a whole lot of difference between you and an animal. There's a reality that. Now, let me really drill down into that specifically from the Bible, not just like an opinion here. It's all in how God made things. God made animals from the earth, from the dust of the earth, just like he made man. He made man from the dust of the earth. The components that make up our makeup physically make up the earth as well. I guess the same 17 elements. But God does something after he forms man, is that he breathes into him the breath of life. What God did at that moment was transform us into something created in his image, with his breath inside of him. So, which means man, according to the Bible, not according to Solomon in his brain fog, man is vastly different than the animals. We are both created beings, but we have the Spirit of God inside of us in our lungs, in our breath, which is a whole fascinating study that I won't bother you with right now. But the natural breathing pattern of a man actually declares the name of God. Every person that lives. Every time you inhale and exhale, you are saying a Hebrew word subtly without even realizing it. It is Jehovah. It's a natural, Yahovah. It's a natural breathing pattern of a person. So with every breath that you take, you and I declare the name of God. Because it's his breath inside of us. Interesting. Isn't it interesting when we die, we stop breathing and our soul leaves our body? Because the thing that once came into us, that God breathed into us, is coming out of us. That's the eternal part of us. But the temporary part of us that we get from genetics and from our parents, that goes into the ground, like an animal goes into the ground. But again, what's amazing about man is we're not animals and we're not angels. Angels are all spiritual beings. That's why they can like go through walls and transport quickly through time. They're not physical at all. They're spiritual. We are both physical and spiritual. That's the amazing makeup of a human being. That's what's so fascinating. And so he's saying that man is no different than an animal, but man is very different. In fact, once again, he can't but help himself. He can't help himself. He's like, man is no different than the animals. But I wonder why man goes up when he dies and animals go down. Who told you that? But that you can't help but say the obvious, that man is not the same as an animal. It's like the most brain dead things that he's saying in this state that he's in, right? He's going in circles and he's trying to rationalize, but he's making a statement and then he's debunking the statement. Man is no different than the animals, but I wonder why when they die they go up and animals go down. Well, that is an interesting thought, isn't it, Solomon? Why is that? Because it's almost like man is greater than the animals only for the fact that God has something to do with them, with you and I. And so his takeaway with the animal aspect is this. He says, well, I guess the only thing a man can do is just rejoice in what he's doing, and it's all going to be over soon is the idea. Well, isn't that encouraging? Hell, have a great Sunday, okay? It's like, hey, you're going to live and die and see you later, man. It's all over. Holy smokes, man. He's like, guy just got to rejoice in what he's doing. Now, let me say this. There's the unnatural or the unspiritual component of this that I can appreciate. Let me explain. Just embrace and enjoy the work that you're part of, what you're doing in your life, without God even. There's a saying, a motivational saying, that says that if you make friends with suffering, you'll never lack for a friend a day in your life. If you make friends with suffering, you'll never lack for a friend a day in your life, right? Because suffering will always be there to take you in and be your friend. And I believe you can introduce yourself to suffering more than you naturally would. And that's kind of the whole idea behind the motivational piece, is that just make yourself comfortable being uncomfortable so that when you're uncomfortable, you're comfortable. That make sense? I only could say that once. I don't think I could ever say that again, so I'm going to leave it alone right there. But that's the idea. If you choose a life of things that bring about suffering in your life, when times of suffering comes, you're all set. You've become accustomed to it. But that is true physically. That is true on a human level to some degree. But I have something so much better for us to end with this morning than that depressing statement. And that is, if you make peace with God and you're friends with Jesus Christ, you'll never be alone a day in your life. A little bit better, isn't it? It's like, well, you can make friends with suffering and you'll never be alone, or you can make friends with Jesus Christ as your Lord and Savior and you'll never be alone, because isn't that exactly what he said when he left this earth? Lo, I am with you always until the end of the earth. Last story. I got 50 seconds to end on time, which we like to do around here. But this story is going to take a lot more than that. So anyway, no, I'll be quick. So some of you heard this, but I'm going to say it for everyone's sake. Again, my pastor is like my father figure. He took me in when I was 17 years old, okay? When I moved in with him, they had a little baby, a few months old, Joshua. Joshua would grow up to be an 18-year-old man and die in a car accident coming up on 2 years ago. And the thing about that is the stuff that he went through and experienced and all of that. And when he got in that accident, everyone was like speechless, like the pastor's son, unbelievable. Well, it came time to do the funeral, and Aaron Dudley is a pastor, and he said, well, I'm going to do the funeral. I won't have it any other way. People, oh, you can't do that. You know, you're suffering. You're hurt. He says, no. I'm doing my son's funeral, and we're not doing the typical funeral. We're doing it in my backyard. We're not doing it with a casket. He had all these things. He wanted to just do a simple backyard funeral, very small group of people. It wasn't like, we're going to invite everybody from the church. Later, they would go on to do sort of a memorial service in that sense, but he wanted to do the actual funeral that way. So I was obviously part of that, being a son-in-law. And he's doing some amazing things as a father who just lost his 18-year-old son in a car accident, things I could never even imagine. I like the one time I went to pray, I was just a blubbering mess. I could barely speak. But he gets up there, and he starts identifying his friends and speaking life into them and saying, you guys don't let this take you down. You don't let the enemy rip you off. Joshua's gone, but he would want you to live on. And just speaking encouragement, strengthening, giving them the scripture. Then he looks at his fiance. He had just bought a house. They were going to get married and move in. He says to her, he said, listen, you don't owe us anything as a family. You can move on. You know, we want you to move on. You don't have to be stuck here forever. If you need to move on, if you want to come here every day the rest of your life, you can. If you need to move on tomorrow, that's fine. You do what you need to do. We're here for you, but you don't owe us anything. Incredible, right? Just amazing. But then he went on to address the rumors that had been going through town. And one of the rumors was that there was a kid in the passenger seat with Joshua that fled the scene. And this is not all that long after, and there's a belief that this kid is still out there. And so he says, I just want to address this, and this completely floored us. We could not believe it. He said someone was in the passenger seat with Joshua when that day happened. We were like, you're kidding me. Who was it? Who was it? What kind of loser would do this and leave him for dead? And he said that person was Jesus Christ that was in that seat. He was right there with him because he promised that he would be with us until the very last day. And Jesus Christ was in that vehicle with Joshua Dudley that day. Well, that'll blow your mind. Like, oh, I thought I was going to get some juicy town gossip. No, just the old promise of the Scripture that if you make friends with Jesus Christ and he's your Lord and Savior, he'll always be with you. And he was with Joshua Dudley that day. So that's how I'll leave that this morning.